Hello, out there in YouTube land. My name is Julie Green, and I'm going to talk about how I ended up with a schizophrenia diagnosis. This is not going to be like the rest of the YouTubes you watch about schizophrenia. A long time ago, in 1983 and 1984, this is when it happened. In 1983, I saw a psychologist who misrepresented his competency. What does this mean? I talked to him and he said he knew all about eating disorders, but he didn't. When a practitioner who is licensed says that he is competent in something he isn't competent in, that's actually illegal. It's at least unethical. And if you misrepresent, if you're a car repairman and you say you can fix Buicks and you actually can't fix Buicks and you screw up, you can probably get sued, or at least you're going to lose awful lot of Buick customers, right? Anyway, it took me quite a long time to figure out that he really didn't know what he was doing. Why? Because I was new to therapy, so I did nothing really to compare it to. What happened next? I was getting worse and worse, and I ended up at another facility. My parents didn't want me to see this guy anymore. They were smart. And a facility called Gold Farm. Gould Farm, interestingly, I saw their advertisement. They were very expensive. They advertised to help get adult children financially independent from their parents. That was one of their advertising tricks. They were saying this. Now, this was going to look pretty lucrative to parents who had already shelled out tons of bucks. Now, my parents liked the looks of this too. I mean, they had already spent $10,000 on day treatment for me, and God knows how much on that incompetent psychologist, so they were very anxious to not shell out any more bucks on me. They wanted to see me back in college, really, what they wanted to see. So they were really excited about Gould Farm. The literature looked great. They were saying, I remember them saying this. I went to Gould Farm. They were, oh my God, the promises. When I got there, I remember the initial interview with Kent Smith, who was running the place. He had this drawl because he came from Virginia, as did his wife, Nancy Smith. I remember sitting in his office, and he had his hands folded like this. And he asked me what I was doing there, and he looked at my records, and he said, well, I'd tried to kill myself. I mean, the guy I seen was a quack, so he let me down. I was 26 years old. 26 years old can't see past the next month, so, well, anyway. I remember he looked at me and said, well, you must be pretty depressed if you try to kill yourself. And I said, well, I have an eating disorder. And he said, well, we don't really deal with that here. And I can just see it now. He probably had check boxes on his form, and there was no eating disorder checkbox there, so he checked off depression. Over the next few months that I was at Gould Farm, where I was extremely unhappy and lonely, I remember noticing that I really wasn't that depressed, but they weren't addressing my eating disorder, and I continued to complain bitterly. They didn't really know what to do with me. And finally, Nancy Smith said, well, we're going to put you on disability. I did not know what that meant. Well, I knew what it was. I didn't know that once you get on disability, statistically, you're not going to get off. I didn't know, I didn't understand the permanence of it. I mean, I just thought it would be a few months or a couple of years or something like that. I thought that it was okay to be on disability because my eating disorder was just, it was crippling me. It was wrecking my life. So I agreed to it. At the time, I really wasn't that depressed, and no way did I qualify for disability as disability on depression. I'd already applied for that. I wasn't depressed enough. I noticed, looking around me, that when people were really, really, really seriously depressed, they just kind of sat in place, and they didn't speak, and they didn't have any motivation. Not that that's a disease, it's a real thing, but I don't believe now that it's a disease, but anyway. That's when you're really depressed. But I wasn't that way. I had energy, and I made conversation with people, and I had interest in things. So I didn't qualify for depression. But I was still complaining about this thing called an eating disorder that they didn't seem to know anything about. But somehow, they got me on disability, which didn't make much sense. I think that to do it, the only way they could do it was to raise the severity of my diagnosis. It was pretty easy to just write in schizophrenia. I did not have to have an exam. There was no exam. They just wrote it in and sent it off. They fulfilled their mission of getting me financially independent from my parents, and then financially dependent on the government. Bingo. Just switch the dependence. Before you know it, I was a welfare case. I remember leaving Gould Farm and then being switched to seeing the doctor that had been there outpatient, and walking into his office and saying, well, what did the voices say? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I had to answer all these questions. He said, what about your delusions? I didn't know what he was talking about. 30 years later, I was still being asked those questions. It never came off my record. I was changed to schizoaffective. It didn't matter. I was still accused repeatedly of psychosis or told that something that I said happened had not happened because it was said, oh, it was just a delusion. My record of my psychotic diagnosis that was on my record followed me for the next 30 years until I got it off. Because it was only passed from one practitioner to another, and no one ever bothered to question it. I was stuck out of work pretty much my whole life. And as of now, I'm struggling to find work. I have an empty resume, and what I believe happened and what I feel I'm going to do most of my activism in now is working on the forced unemployment aspect of the mental health system, because I feel that this is a very, very serious crime and fraud, gross fraud, welfare fraud, Medicare fraud, unemployment fraud, discrimination, and it kills people. Thank you.